Iran's Revolutionary Guard has threatened to target US universities in West Asia. And this is after claiming US-Israeli strikes had destroyed 2 Iranian universities. In a statement published by Iranian media, the IRGC said, I quote here, if the US government wants its universities in the region to be free from retaliation, it must condemn the bombing of the universities in an official statement by 12 noon on Monday, 30th of March by Tehran time. Through this statement, it advised all employees, professors, students of American universities in the region and residents of their surrounding areas, stay a kilometer away from campuses. Several US universities have campuses which are scattered through the Gulf region, such as Texas A&M University in Qatar and New York University in the United Arab Emirates. Strikes overnight on Friday to Saturday hit Tehran, including the University of Science and Technology in the northeast of the capital, damaging buildings but not causing any casualties, as per media reports. Fresh strikes have again been reported in the Iranian capital. Local media reports said that joint US-Israeli strikes hit multiple residential buildings, killing more than a dozen people. Strikes continue even as US Vice President J.D. Vance says that the war in Iran is short-term.
Well, the president said, look, we've accomplished the gross majority of our military objectives. I think you can make a good argument we've accomplished all of our military objectives. The president's going to keep at it for a little while longer to ensure that once we leave, we don't have to do this again for a very, very long time.
But reports suggest otherwise. US officials have told the Washington Post that the Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations in Iran, as thousands of American soldiers and Marines arrive in West Asia for what could become a dangerous new phase of the war, should President Trump choose to escalate this further. The officials told the Post that any potential ground operation would fall short of a full-scale invasion and could instead involve raids by a mixture of special operations forces and conventional infantry troops. Discussions within the administration over the past month have touched upon the possible seizure of Kharg Island, which is a key Iranian oil export hub in the Persian Gulf, and raid into other coastal areas near the Strait of Hormuz to find and destroy weapons that can target commercial and military shipping. All right, to discuss this further, I'm now being joined by James A. Russell, live from Monterey, California. He is an emeritus professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. Professor Russell, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining us here. The Houthis getting involved in the war, attacks continuing across the Gulf, ground operations and troops being readied for a possible deployment inside Iran. Are these signs of a short-term war, as the US Vice President has said?
I don't think so. I think that the evidence suggests that the United States is preparing for longer-term military operations, although I would hasten to add that we are not deploying the numbers of troops necessary to sustain those operations for any length of time. The Marine Expeditionary Unit of 2,500 people, that's not enough. It's not of sufficient size to conduct sustained operations and occupy any kind of wide swath of Iranian territory. So it's not clear what these forward deployed military forces are actually going to be used for.
Professor, I'll quickly go back to a statement that had come out from Joe Kent. For our viewers, Joe Kent was the former director of National Counterterrorism Center in the US. He's resigned now just weeks earlier. Very quickly, Professor Russell, he had mentioned that all 18 surveillance agencies, intelligence agencies in the US had advised, saying that there is no imminent threat from Iran. But he mentioned that there was a scenario being presented by Israel suggesting that they could very quickly develop nuclear bombs. And that's what the US went with. Let me quickly now cut across to what happened recently. Now, as per reports, there was a phone call between J.D. Vance and Netanyahu questioning on what was the scenario that was presented by Israel to the US regarding the objectives that and how quickly they will be able to achieve it in Iran. Looking at these two things individually and collectively, do you find that the US went into it on Israel's saying and they've underestimated the abilities of Iran to continue it so long?
I don't think there's any question of this. And when I say this, what I mean is there's no question that Benjamin Netanyahu leaned heavily on President Trump, as did the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. The New York Times has reported that the Mossad presented this plan to Netanyahu or presented these ideas that the Iranian regime would quickly collapse, and that Netanyahu then presented these ideas to President Trump as part of his effort to sell Trump on the war. And as you indicated in your comments, if Trump had bothered to have asked the seasoned intelligence professionals in his own government about their assessment, he would have been told something completely different. So we have a situation here in which the United States basically went to war against another country on the word of the Israeli prime minister and with the supporting case presented by Israeli intelligence. And I can tell you, this is an unprecedented situation for the United States to essentially have been convinced to go to war like this on behalf of another country that does not present a threat to the United States. You will have noted that even Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, refused to say that Iran presented a direct threat to the United States when she appeared last week. So this is a whole series of very disturbing circumstances that in which the United States, of course, is today simply prosecuting an Israeli war plan, which turns the United States, as much as I hate to say this, into a hired gun, if you will. I mean, whose idea was it to bomb Israeli universities? What does that have to do with fighting a war? I mean, whose idea has it been to have bombed the hospitals in Tehran? I mean, I'm flabbergasted and embarrassed that my country is affiliated with this way of war. But this is the situation we find ourselves in.
Professor Russell, the number of times the US president has said, we won, we're winning so well, it happens sporadically, and it almost is now intermittent between other claims of continuing the fight. It's coming in the middle of it, alternating almost at this point. But at the same time, the US president is also asking Iran, accept defeat, accept defeat. Is this a face-saving tool at this point to convince the US public that yes, we won, but he needs that symbolic win? Are we reading this correctly? Do you read it otherwise? How do your assessments?
Yeah, you should be thankful that you and your viewers don't live in a country like this, in which we have the leader, the chief executive of the country, the elected president, expressing these such widely divergent views on a pretty continuous basis, which frankly raises very serious questions about his mental fitness for office. I don't say something like this lightly. But we've had the president appearing in the press making these assertions about victory without providing any shred of evidence that any objectives have been accomplished. As you have reported on your show previously numerous times, the president has come up with a series of different objectives depending on his mood in the day. It's nonsensical, and you can't undertake such serious. There can be no more serious steps that any leader can take than to commit his country to war. And yet we have a president in the United States that has done this without any clear explanation of the purpose of the war. the threat to the state, and how we as a country would know we had achieved these objectives. It's an absolutely scandalous and terrible state of affairs because, and of course, as is always the case in these situations, innocent people are being killed because of it, and that's also a tragedy. We can't forget that, we have the United States effectively participating again in this Israeli way of war of targeting residential compounds, blowing up hospitals, firing missiles off at universities. I mean, this is just, this is it's a sorry day for the American democracy.
Understood. Professor Russell, and you had mentioned about Tulsi Gabbard in a Senate hearing where she mentioned about no imminent threat from Iran in terms of nuclear weapons. But she had also mentioned that the regime in Iran remains largely intact, though diminished. So that again goes into what we have been discussing. But thank you so much for joining me here, making time for us. There will be more to discuss as this war doesn't seem to be tapering down at this point, regardless of what statements are coming in from the US administration. That was Professor James Russell joining me here on the broadcast. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.